You know the sound, a low shimmer of notes, steady as breath. It feels like moonlight, soft, still, fading like a memory. We call it the Moonlight Sonata today, but Beethoven never gave it that name. He didn't write about stars or lakes or silver light. He called it something else entirely. Piano Sonata number 14 in C-sharp minor, Opus 27 number 2, Sonata quasi una fantasia. And what he wrote was not what the world expected. In Vienna, 1801, the air shimmered with spectacle, concerts, salons, gossip, smoke. Beethoven was the kind of name people whispered about, half in awe, half in confusion. He played like no one else, bold, improvised, unpredictable. But something had started to shift. The rooms were still full, the applause was still loud. But to Beethoven, the world itself was growing quieter. He didn't talk about it, not yet. Instead, he wrote, not with rage, not with sadness, with restraint, with space, with stillness. A sound barely above silence, a decision disguised as music. Unlike most of his sonatas, this one doesn't begin with a flourish. There's no grand entrance, no fireworks, just a soft pulse, repeating, waiting. It isn't a melody that demands attention. It's one that watches to see who's listening. There's a kind of quiet built into it that doesn't feel like calm. It feels like caution, as if something's being held back. That first movement has been called many things, a lullaby, a lament, a love song, but maybe it's something simpler and heavier. In 1832, 5 years after Beethoven's death, the German poet Ludwig Rellstab heard the first movement and imagined moonlight shimmering over a lake. He gave it a new name, the Mondschein Sonate. The word stuck. It was beautiful, effortless, romantic. It made people feel things they could name. And so it spread until it became the only way most people ever heard it. The Moonlight Sonata. The name changed the way people listened. Moonlight instead of quasi una fantasia. Suddenly, the piece wasn't about tension, it was about beauty. They missed the storm waiting in the final movement. They missed the fracture lines beneath the surface. They turned it into something gentle, something still, something safe. But Beethoven didn't write safe. Not then. Not ever. In 1801, he was beginning to understand that something inside him was shifting. And not just his hearing. There was a pressure building, but not the kind that explodes, the kind that compresses, the kind that turns into music that never raises its voice and still says everything. That year, he finished the piece and dedicated it to a young woman named Giulietta Guicciardi, one of his students. Some say he loved her. Others say she was a brief fascination. We don't really know. But her name stayed on the title page long after the rest of the story disappeared. Vienna did what Vienna always did. It romanticized, it filled in the gaps. A student, a genius, a sonata. It had to be love. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. What matters is that Beethoven never told us. He left the dedication, and nothing more. The music doesn't plead. It doesn't confess. It does something stranger. It watches. It waits. It resists easy meaning. And that, perhaps, is why the myths grew louder than the notes. One story claimed that Beethoven played it for a blind girl in a moonlit room. That she wept. That he wept. It never happened, but people needed it to have happened. because stories about moonlight are easier to carry than stories about pressure, about silence, about being locked inside your own mind. The truth is quieter and harder. This piece wasn't written in a beam of light. It was carved out of shadow, bit by bit, note by note, with the kind of care that doesn't ask to be understood. In 1802, a year after the sonata was published, Beethoven left the city for a village called Heiligenstadt. There, he wrote a letter he never sent. It wasn't for critics or for audiences, it was for his brothers. In it, he admitted what he had been hiding. His hearing was fading faster than anyone knew. He felt alone, cut off, tired. But in the final lines, he made a decision, not dramatic, not loud, just steady. He would keep going. He would write. He would finish what he started. And when we return to the sonata with that letter in mind, it sounds different. That quiet isn't stillness, it's weight. That steadiness isn't comfort, it's resistance. And when the final movement arrives, fast, furious, breathless, it's not a surprise, it's a release. The storm was always there, we just weren't listening. Giulietta married someone else, someone more appropriate, a count, a match, the kind of decision that doesn't need music. Beethoven moved on, or said he did. The sonata stayed. So did its shape. First the breath, then the ritual, then the rupture. It wasn't about love anymore. If it ever was, it had become something else, a way of structuring feeling, a kind of emotional architecture. That's why it lasted, why it kept returning, in living rooms, in classrooms, in concert halls, in quiet apartments with thin walls and small windows. The name brought people in, but the structure kept them there, even when they didn't know why. It gave form to things we don't know how to say. Things like pressure, things like restraint, things like grief that hasn't finished arriving yet. We still argue about the girl, about the name, about whether he could hear when he wrote it. But the music doesn't care. It moves like memory, soft at the edges, sharp underneath. The first movement asks for nothing, the second gives a little light, and the third doesn't wait. It surges forward like something that can't be held anymore. Beethoven never explained it, and maybe that's why it stayed. It left space for stories, for misreadings, for return. The myth of the moonlight made it beautiful. The music made it necessary, not because it soothed, but because it showed a way through, a structure for surviving something invisible. We still call it the Moonlight Sonata, a name that was never Beethoven's, but one that has lived longer than his own words. And maybe that's the point. Names become myths. Myths become stories we tell ourselves. People wanted stillness. They wanted romance. They needed it to mean peace. But not all stillness is peace. We gave it a name that helped us sleep. He gave us something that helped him survive. One told a story, the other told the truth. And if you listen closely, beyond the shimmer, beyond the calm, and beyond the notes, you might hear the sound of someone trying not to disappear. But the real question is, what part of yourself is still waiting to be heard? If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and also hit the notification bell so you won't miss future deep dives into the hidden stories behind timeless music like this.